So, I welcome you to episode number 3 in the podcast, 45 with Head Biotech.
But I have to say, these are really special circumstances. I don't actually think this is funny at all. Last time it was also a bit uncomfortable because of these terrible sect and demon things with Jack Parsons and Crowley. But just 2 days after the last episode last Saturday, which then I thought it would be a long time until the next episode. Then a very central and well-known NASA-associated researcher was murdered, close to where Parsons and then were active in the 1930s and 40s. The crime happened only about 100 kilometers from where Parsons' sect, the Lemma, believed that a demon woman called Babalan could come from behind the abyss to Earth out of some caves in the desert or something. Nearby, in the same desert north of Los Angeles, was also another place, a place where Parsons suggested there as a direct portal to hell. It's just about 100 kilometers away from the picture in the desert here. But the researcher who was killed last Monday, I don't want a picture of him here like I had with Jack Parsons. Keep in mind that Parsons were active almost 100 years ago, so they don't have any friends or relatives anymore who would be affected. But when it comes to that murder on the researcher Carl Grillmer, this happened last Monday, 1 week ago, and that's where I draw the line. I will not put up pictures of him here, but I almost have to write about this on X. I'm not sitting here just for fun. I haven't written all these articles and sat for thousands of hours working on the 4th law of thermodynamics, developed the paradise machine model and approach theory. I haven't sat with that for so many years just for fun. There is a professional reason why I'm sitting here. There's also a reason why I have sunglasses and a cap on. But the LA cap has nothing to do with Jack Parsons and how California seems to be so central so far in the podcast. This cap is just my favorite cap. It's not even particularly a nice cap. The cap is just my favorite cap that I've always used for many years, but has nothing to do with LA and those things that have started to going on in the podcast. The thing with the cap and sunglasses is mostly because the topics in the podcast are a bit sketchy. I knew that before I started. I knew I was going to talk about the paradise machine model, the approach theory, and these things. It was also a bit of a difficult choice when I was going to write about these things in the 2024 paper. I had to put my name on the articles with these theories. But this I explained all about in the pilot episode about the NASA curse, etc., lasting for over an hour. However, in my head, the build-up of the NASA curse is pretty solid. But what has happened now is what seems to be the 4th incident in the NASA curse theory. At least this time I can document this extension of the theory. Since I actually warned NASA as early as last year in October 2025, when I wrote the FTL article on instant signaling of the central zero-risk signal in the approach theory. This was in September and October 2025. In that article, it was one of the first times I started writing about this topic. Concerning NASA delay of their exclusive 3I Atlas images they took from the planet Mars, the importance of being open about and sharing their information from interstellar objects with the rest of the world. It was around that time that the shutdown was happening in the USA, and NASA was withholding their images of 3I Atlas taken from Mars. So I actually wrote about it already in the 2025 FTL article back in October and on social media. The point in the FTL article was actually originally to praise NASA and others because they had been open with their data until then, that is. Because without NASA, I would never have learned about 1I Annua in 2017, and the approach theory wouldn't have existed. Because it was NASA that discovered and reported on Oumuamua first in 2017. This first interstellar object was discovered with the Pan-STARRS telescope in Hawaii, one of the telescopes Carl Grillmer was also an expert on. The problem with NASA in relation to the NASA curse is that they withheld the images of 3I Atlas for days during the shutdown last fall. I didn't write that the consequences would be a curse, but the NASA curse started shortly after their delay ended, with them losing control of the MAVEN probe on Mars on December 6, 2025. So it really all started on December 6, 2025. Even NRK in Norway ran the story that NASA in the USA had lost contact with MAVEN orbiting Mars. So this was international news, and after MAVEN, the curse just seemed to continue. On January 7, NASA had a press conference because the crew on ISS had to return to Earth due to a medical situation in Crew 11 with the astronaut Mike Fink. NASA therefore had to abort the mission on ISS by a month and return to Earth. A lot of money was lost. They even had to cancel a planned spacewalk. Then comes January 27, 2026. Then the NASA plane in Ohio crash-landed, which is also very special. It was after this third event in the predicted curse that I thought I should make a podcast on this. But now I'm switching over to the news. And after the news, I'm going to go through what I think about exactly that murder case on Monday. Welcome back. So now it's over to the special topic for this episode 3 in the podcast. It's about the tragic murder of Carl Grillmer on Monday, February 16 in Los Angeles. He was a professor at Caltech in California, and I guess he was one of the favorites of NASA. And now I have to be allowed to be a bit conspiratorial, because when you get up to these levels, national security in the USA and NASA, then we're talking about perhaps the most important things, places where things are really kept secret. That's why I actually suspect that even though Carl was not officially on the payroll of NASA, but on the payroll of Caltech, I have the feeling that he was the best researcher NASA had in his field. I think that NASA keeps their best people actually a bit away from NASA, simply to protect them. That's just how I imagine it then, that he might as well have worked directly for NASA. Anyway, he was clearly a top guy in his field, and as I write on X, there is no doubt that Carl, as I will call him from now on, probably was one of NASA's most important eyes in the skies. He was one of the few who really could master NASA equipment, and he had very good analytical abilities. I have investigated a bit regarding these various telescopes that he has had expertise on. It turns out that he has been one of the few, maybe as few as 10 persons in the world, who could match Carl's expertise on NASA telescopes. He was also an expert on the telescope that Oumuamua was discovered with, Tan stars. In recent years, he was busy with the Gaia telescope and researched dark matter, but of course, all researchers vary their work. They research different themes in space, but the more I have understood about Carl's research is that there may be something secret here regarding interstellar objects, such as Oumuamua and 3I Atlas. And then I can actually address NASA directly if they should look at it. If you know that Carl worked with what I think has triggered the NASA curse, that he was involved in analyzing the images from 3I Atlas last fall, while the rest of the world was kept waiting, then there is almost no doubt anymore. Then something is happening here. So what could it be? But NASA can think for themselves if they know it is true about Carl that he was directly involved in analyzing the pictures of 3I Atlas. Then his tragic death connects directly to the theory of the NASA curse. Then you have to watch out, because then these events with Maven, etc., are probably not random either. Then I can just say, to use the expression, then you have perhaps stepped in the world's worst salad bowl. And I'm not saying that to try to be funny or anything like that, as explained on X. I compare the situation to unwillingly coming between a grizzly bear and her cubs. I don't care so much about what NASA's intention was by withholding the images of 3I Atlas. It's a pretty human behavior. They would like to have the information first, before everyone else. But what I don't like is if they at the same time, on the surface, claim that 3I Atlas was an ordinary comet and laugh it off as "don't you worry about this" to the public. Then I get a bit worried actually. Because we who have studied and followed 3I Atlas, like Avi Loeb, and especially I who have got confirmation from 3I Atlas' behavior relative to the article launching the approach theory in 2024. 3I Atlas has confirmed with its special trajectory, confirmed much of the approach theory via its behavior, which should be the predicted behavior of the Fermi life form that are supposed to move towards Earth now as we speak. So if that is the case, that the killed professor was indeed involved in a secret project on 3I Atlas, it seems a bit rude by NASA to pretend they are not interested in 3I Atlas when they should be interested in sharing their knowledge with the public, as Avi Loeb and them at Harvard do. The job of scientists is to share their knowledge with the public, in particular, in NASA case, living of taxes from the public, but I suspect that there are politicians in the background working here, politicians who perhaps have pulled the strings. But if it should be the case that Carl was directly involved in a secret 3I Atlas project, then you have to contact me or understand your situation yourselves, because this can potentially be very serious for you and everyone who gets involved, as this case with Carl may be an example of. But I think it's crazy myself, because the case is that an ordinary person seems to have killed Carl, a person who was called Freddie Snyder. The police say that Freddie Snyder came on foot to this house in the picture to my right here, which is Carl's house in Los Angeles. The house is quite remote out in the desert, and Snyder came on foot onto his property. We don't know the details, but at some point he has shot and killed Carl on the porch. Then he has walked on foot out of the property again, and then carjacked a car with the murder weapon from a completely different person who lived in this small settlement in the desert north of Los Angeles. And then the police catch him for that carjacking, and only then do the police link Freddie Snyder to the murder of Carl. Because then he still has his weapon with him. That's roughly the sequence of events, so there is nothing special about it. On the surface, it's a human who has done this. I just think it's strange that it happens to the researcher Carl. Then there is another thing that is also strange. Most people probably thought that the perpetrator was a guy on drugs who just wanted quick money. That the murder was random. That Carl was just unlucky. But the case is that the police in California have said that the suspect has been on Carl's property before with a loaded weapon. On 20 December last year, Carl called the police to get Snyder off from his property. The police said Snyder managed to get away, but they took him a little later, and then they took him with a loaded weapon. It was December 20, but the police say that the two did not know each other. This episode from December last year means that he has been on the property with a loaded weapon earlier. Why should he go to the same place twice? Then it's no longer about money. And Snyder has not taken anything from Carl or from his property. He seems to just have killed him and left the area. So what I think then is that it could be thought that it was a contract killing, for example. It could be that. I'm not saying that it has to be something mysterious involving the Fermi life forms. I'm just saying, if Carl was involved in a secret 3I Atlas investigation during the shutdown last fall, perhaps he was even one of the main people behind those who examined NASA images of 3I Atlas, then I think that it perhaps can explain the NASA curse, not just this tragic incident, but all the other incidents too, since Mavin on December 6. Which curse started just about 14 days after that. NASA released the images to the rest of the world after 43 days of withholding the images from the public. After their delay was over, it went just about 14 days before NASA lost contact with Mavin on Mars. Then it was 27 November. It was only about 10 days before NASA lost contact with Mavin. It was then that the global UN observation of 3I Atlas started. The UN initiative for the global observation of 3I Atlas was to train on a scenario so Earth could protect itself against comets and potentially dangerous interstellar objects posing a threat to Earth. To train on what they can do to detect these objects early on, etc. LA Times reported something in an article after the murder. It was that the last thing Carl read about before he died, or possibly the articles that were found with him on the property. It was literature on how comets and interstellar objects like 3I Atlas can be a threat to Earth. And that is very strange that he reads about these UN things regarding the global observation of 3I Atlas. I would say there are quite a few things in this case that indicate that Carl has been involved in 3I Atlas. And another thing that I have mentioned on X, it is, now I cannot document all this here, but I have of course used Grok. I have at least the latest version of Grok 4. And I know that there are many who are opponents of AI tools, but I try to get something useful out of them. I at least try not to ask questions in such a way that Grok should make me satisfied. Because it may be that some have a point with the AI tools, but they can shape themselves to make you happy so that you use it more. But mostly my impression from, for example, Bill Gates, he says that he uses AI for complicated physics problems. So we should not exaggerate the problem. But I know that there are critics out there who say that, and them, I should emphasize that. So I cannot use Grok as evidence just because Grok says it, but Grok has answered that Carl's official research activity sank significantly after Aoumuamua in 2017. And the reason I asked Grok exactly this question was because I had this suspicion that he might have been used on a secret mission by NASA precisely on interstellar objects. Because I think that even Aoumuamua was a huge, strange event that many should have taken hold of, including NASA. But there too, NASA is very much like we don't care. It's a non-issue. While Avi Loeb at Harvard, he was on the case right away and reported and said, "This is super strange," and that I have also written in mini articles 1 and 2 why Aoumuamua was interesting. Yes, Aoumuamua actually helped launch the approach theory right from the beginning in the article. And what Avi Loeb made a point of was that even the CIA has an expression when it came to 3I/Atlas that we can neither confirm nor deny regarding 3I Atlas. It's like a hint from the CIA that there actually is something going on. We can neither confirm nor deny. But from my perspective on this is if NASA really has fallen into a trap they stepped into last fall, which started a so-called curse, something they absolutely did not wanted, but which in my theory could explain the curse. NASA could have understood it. The approach theory has been on the net ever since 2024. But I do understand that they do not have resources to vacuum everything that is on the net and take into account all theories on the net, but I try at least. I have tried all the time and been factual and such, and tried to just use professional arguments and behaved as well as I can, so that there should be no reason to reject me because of some other things than the scientific arguments. So, but this here I would say is the introduction episode on this case because what is happening now is that soon a lot of new information will come in the next weeks. Freddie Snyder is to be brought to court, and the police will probably come with more details and such things. So in case there comes a shock wave of new information, I made this small episode first, so that I don't use up a future episode on these basic things. I rather use this episode to present the case, but remember that this case is very fresh now. So then it is the conspiratorial angle that I hoped I was finished with after episode 1 and 2. But look in the desert here to my right. It is right by where Jack Parsons was active with his demon sect. This is just kilometers away to the west in the desert here. In the desert here, where Jack Parsons and the sect believed they had found the portal to hell and the holy places to the horror demon, Babalan, women were hiding behind the abyss.
100 kilometers west of here in the desert
is where the Thelema sect conducted rituals in the same desert. But Carl doesn't seem like that. Everyone who knew him describes him as a very nice person, and you can almost see from the pictures of him. He looks like a very kind and decent person. But after the Jack Parsons episodes and learning about the Thelema demon sect and its ties, then I linked the Thelema sect to the Epstein case, to a potential modern global elite version of the sect. Then I started thinking further and wrote that open letter last week. Sometimes I write these open letters from Head Biotech. I do that in the cases where I feel that the world should know about something, when I feel that, okay, this I almost have to tell about. Because this perspective, I think no one else than me can understand. The perspective from the Paradise Machine model. I know, of course, that not everyone reads this poem letters with equally great eagerness, but I almost have to do it sometimes. It is when I open a post on X, etc., with dear followers of Head Biotech and Paradise Machine Model. It happens when there is something a bit important. I have done it circa 2 times before. And now I did it again after the episodes about Parsons and the Thelema sect, because I saw that what they were doing seemed to be much of the same according to the Paradise Machine model, but in reverse. Just as they tried to cultivate a hell machine instead of a paradise machine, the total opposite of the Paradise Machine model. I saw several characteristics the more I dug into their thinking. Eventually, I saw that everything is the opposite right. The chaos and these demon women instead of paradise women. There were several things I saw that were exactly the opposite. And especially the chaos, that they are dependent on turning the chaos against nature, when I started to understand it. And the last thing with the Paradise Machine model and the Fermi life forms, or paradise women, the highest status in the entire Paradise Machine is supposed to be the child and the baby. The child is the most important person with the highest priority and status in the entire Paradise Machine. And if that is also opposite in this Thelema demon sect, that perhaps has spread in secret since the 1940, but this time kept hidden. It turns out that very, very smart people like Jack Parsons, that there is something about that Thelema sect that attracts the very smart people. It may indicate that it did. Remember that Jack Parsons recruited others into this Thelema sect in the environment that eventually became NASA. I even think that 3 of the first who started one of the companies in this rocket science environment. In one of these companies, one of the predecessors to NASA, JPL, and such, at one point there were 3 of 10 or 20 employees or something, were at an early point members of the Lemesut. So there must be something with that sect down in the details, in the rituals or something like that, where they can show results. Something that makes other smart people become convinced that this is right. I think the Paradise Machine model can be right. And if they see the same as I see in the Paradise Machine model, just with opposite sign, then it should also apply to the role of children. And these crazy rumors that these secret globalist sects should want to be mean to children and such, no one really believes that. I have always thought that there are always some rumors that must exist, the worst rumors you can imagine, etc. But then I start thinking, oh, but in this case they may actually have a motive. Wow, it could be that if it is as I think that the sect is about, that demon sect there, that it is 180 degrees opposite of the paradise machine model. That would perhaps also augur for the children, their relationship to children. And the article on the Paradise Machine model also says in Part 3 that evil, according to the Paradise Machine model, will try to make its own Paradise Machine, just with opposite sign. It's one part of the lore itself that is described in Part 3 in detail. It says or suggests that the archery of evil will try to make its own paradise machine when the conditions become optimal. Just that then it becomes all opposite, trying to create a hell machine instead. But only in theory, only, right? That's why I wrote that open letter. Let's say they are much, much smarter than all the rest of us, then they are smarter. It's like some have IQ of perhaps 150 and 160, and if the rest of us have IQ of 110 and such, then it becomes almost like the difference between us and a dog, because we can easily fool a dog if we want. So it may be that they are just much smarter, so that we can never figure them out. But that's where I use my theory to figure them out, if you understand. And therefore, I think that one really cannot trust anyone, namely. But I will at least not accuse Carl of that. But now we are right in the middle of the lemma soup here. We are at Caltech, we are in JPL, we are in NASA. We are in these environments, super high IQ environments. And then with this background here, I of course do not accuse Carl of that, of course not. But I mean, there may be something like that too. Something really strange sect stuff going on. But probably he was just shot and killed by Snyder. But it was not random, because it was the second time Snyder was on the property with a loaded weapon. So I would say, quite realistically, if it is such spooky sect power play, then maybe Snyder was hired to kill him. But the mysterious and demons and such have been involved, Fermi life forms, etc., which are much higher than us. I can't even try to understand that. I'm just arguing, was it Fermi life forms, for example? At least on a theoretical basis, that Carl and NASA have ended up between a grizzly and her cubs when they prevented the Fermi life forms to send signals, prevented them from being able to communicate with the rest of us by putting them on hold. It's like if your house is burning and you call the fire department and then they put you on hold. It's the same feeling. That's how the Fermi life form is supposed to experience NASA, and then possibly Carl's withholding of the 3I Atlas images. I never imagined that this podcast would become so dramatic, because dramatic it is when people die. Because in the first 3 cases, there have only been material and economic damages with this NASA curse. Have also thought about that the crew on the Artemis 2 rocket, they are, according to the theory, supposed to be brave to take high risk and dare to travel out in space like that. So according to the theory then, they should not be enemies of the Fermi life form. So I would think it would be a bit strange if, let's say, Artemis 2 explodes and everyone on board perishes. That may be the Fermi life form should do it in another way to demonstrate or to stop massa, but it is perhaps depending on how desperate they are. But when a death finally comes, if it turns out that Carl was directly involved in exactly the thing I think may have triggered the NASA curse, then it is very interesting. Everyone must agree on that. Okay, then I thank you for this episode, which became a bit sad and dramatic again. Yes, we talk about murder, so we'll just see what happens next in the case. And then there was that from the news earlier in this episode that now the Artemis 2 launch is postponed to earliest in April, so it will be quite a while until the live broadcast episode will happen. But if there comes a news update from Los Angeles, from the police, for example, in the USA, if there comes some very important update in this case, there will probably be an episode 4. The case is still very fresh and open. It is difficult to be very well prepared here, but if I am to make an episode 4, then it will probably be more structured to aim at more specific things. This episode was more of an introduction to a case that can continue further, I guess. Okay, then I thank you for your attention also this time.